This is cobalt. You're probably carrying some right now in your phone, your laptop. It powers the devices that run your life, and over 70% of it comes from one place. And in Eastern Congo, minerals have helped finance an endless war. On December 4th, 2025, three men signed what the White House called, quote, a historic turning point, a deal to end one of the world's deadliest wars. President Donald Trump stood between Paul Kagame of Rwanda and Felix Tshisekedi of the Democratic Republic of Congo as they shook hands and signed documents. This was hailed as historic. Trump has finally achieved his lifelong dream of being a mediator of peace, not only in the Middle East, this time in Africa. The problem is, this deal is not what you think. Let me show you what they are not telling you about this secret plot to steal DRC's minerals, all with a pen. For 3 decades, Eastern Congo has been hell. Slow collapse, villages emptied, children dying from diseases that shouldn't kill anyone in 2025. More than 5 million people dead. Not just from bullets, but starvation, cholera, displacement, the deadliest conflict since World War II. And most of the world simply ignored it. The foundation of this war lies in the Rwandan genocide. In April 1994, Hutu extremists murdered approximately 800,000 Tutsis in 100 days. When Paul Kagame's Rwanda Patriotic Front stopped the genocide, the perpetrators fled across the border into eastern Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Among those who fled were the architects of the genocide. In eastern Zaire, they regrouped and reformed themselves as the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, the FDLR. Their stated goal was to return to Rwanda and overthrow Kagame's government. For 30 years, this threat has been Rwanda's permanent justification. Every intervention, every proxy war, every time Rwanda is asked why its troops operate inside Congo, the answer is always the same: the FDLR. In the mid to late 90s, Rwanda invaded Zaire twice. Even after a ceasefire in 2003, Eastern Congo remained a battleground for dozens of armed groups competing for control of minerals, land, and economic territory. By the 2010s, a new actor emerged, M23, named after a March 23, 2009 peace agreement. M23 is officially a Tutsi-led movement fighting for the rights of Congolese Tutsis. But UN investigators consistently documented that M23 was directly backed by Rwanda, trained, equipped, and often commanded by Rwandan officers. Between 2012 and 2013, M23 seized vast territories and briefly occupied Goma, the regional capital. The international community condemned Rwanda's support. Kigali denied involvement. In late 2022, recognizing that military solutions were unachievable, Angola's president, João Lourenço, initiated the Luandan process. The logic was to bring Tshisekedi and Kagame together for secret talks, create trust, find common ground. The Luanda process dragged on for 2 years with no compromise. Neither side trusted the other. As the Luanda diplomatic track stalled, a military intervention mechanism was activated, the Nairobi process, led by the East African Community. The East African Regional Forces deployed to Eastern Congo to fight M23. The EAC Regional Force deployed in November 2022 and began withdrawing by December 2023, after Kinshasa said it wasn't delivering results. Then came the crisis of late 2024 and early 2025. In January 2025, M23 launched a major offensive seizing territory north of Goma. After the fall of Goma in late January 2025, M23 expanded across North Kivu, shocking observers who thought the rebel group was contained. Goma, a city of 2 million, was surrounded by military lines and facing food shortages. Cholera outbreaks were reported. Intelligence reports indicated that Washington worried that Chinese state-owned enterprises were preparing to use private military contractors to secure mining zones unilaterally. The US recognized this as a critical vulnerability. If China secured the mines while the DRC government remained weak, Beijing would have a de facto economic monopoly over the DRC's cobalt and copper for a generation. President Tshisekedi, facing mounting pressure from political rivals, announced the formation of a government of national unity. This was to address the crisis, but it was soon perceived as a sign of weakness. You see, for decades, the DRC-Rwanda conflict was treated as an African problem requiring African solutions. The US maintained a diplomatic presence but avoided deep involvement. However, by mid-2025, the Trump administration recognized that the conflict was now a direct US strategic interest. Because, you see, the US is in a race with China as competition heats up over rare earth minerals. Soon enough, US officials focused on energy, infrastructure, and African policy stepped in. They were here to broker a deal that involves US investment, security guarantees, and access to minerals. The negotiations were intense and secretive. Kagame demanded the disarmament of the FDLR as a precondition. Tshisekedi demanded the disarmament of M23 and a Rwandan withdrawal. The US kept both sides at the table by offering something neither could refuse: American capital, security guarantees, and the promise of a new regional architecture. By September 2025, a framework agreement was reached. By November, the text was finalized, and on December 4, 2025, it was signed at the White House. But there is more to this than meets the eye. The Washington Accord is not a singular document. It is a package agreement consisting of three interconnected frameworks. There is the main peace agreement, the regional economic integration framework, and the concept of operations for implementation. The public commitments were straightforward: an immediate and permanent cessation of hostilities by both parties. Both parties even reaffirmed respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, with the United States, Qatar, and the African Union serving as guarantors. But the real agreement, that is the one that reveals what this deal is actually about, is the Regional Economic Integration Framework, the REIF, which was formally signed on November 7, 2025, just before the December 4th ceremony. It fundamentally reshapes the economic relationship between the DRC and Rwanda. The framework establishes joint working groups in 5 areas, but the first pillar is what matters here: mineral supply chains. This is the breakthrough. Instead of minerals being smuggled and enriching warlords, they will now flow through legal channels. In this case, Rwanda. The DRC will receive export tax revenue. Rwanda, on the other hand, will receive processing and transit fees. US companies will receive materials certified as conflict-free. You see how none of this talks about using said minerals to develop the DRC itself? For decades, Rwanda has been accused of smuggling Congolese minerals. In 2024, Rwanda exported $1.5 billion in gold. The Century documented that M23 pillaged $70 million in gold from Congo since May 2025 alone and smuggled it to Rwanda. Rwanda always denied this. This deal now makes all of it legal. What was once smuggling becomes official trade, endorsed by the United States and the international community. But it gets more specific. Within the REIF, there is a particular controversial provision known as the Strategic Asset Reserve. According to the agreement, the DRC designates certain critical mineral assets like gold assets and unlicensed exploration areas as part of a Strategic Asset Reserve. For these assets, US companies receive, quote, a right of first offer. What this means is that before any other company, including Chinese, European, African, can negotiate a mining concession here, US companies have first refusal rights. That is, even companies owned by Congolese people will be treated as a second option for minerals found in their own country. This is what the deal was really about. Not peace, but access. The United States did not broker the Washington Accord out of humanitarian concern. The US intervention was driven by a specific calculable strategic interest, securing critical mineral supply chains in the face of overwhelming Chinese dominance. While the DRC mines 70% of the world's cobalt and possesses vast reserves of lithium, copper, and other battery minerals, China controls approximately 70 to 90% of the global processing capacity for critical minerals. In 2023, China briefly threatened to restrict exports of gallium and germanium used in semiconductors and aerospace, sending shockwaves through Western defense and tech sectors. The threat was withdrawn, but it was made clear China had the ability to hold Western industries hostage by controlling the processing bottleneck. From a US national security perspective, this was unacceptable. The Department of Defense calculated that if Chinese EV battery manufacturers continued to dominate global production, then US military superiority, which increasingly depends on battery technology, was at risk. For the Trump administration, this was viewed as an existential threat to American industrial leadership and geopolitical influence. In response to this vulnerability, the United States adopted a strategy called friendshoring. The concept is quite straightforward. Now, instead of relying on a global supply chain where key inputs come from potentially hostile or unreliable nations, the United States and its allies would now deliberately build supply chains that sourced critical goods from friendly or trusted nations. For critical minerals, the friendshoring strategy has three components: domestic mining, mining in allied nations, and mining in strategic developing nations. This is where the DRC comes in. The DRC is not an FTA partner, nor is it formally allied with the United States. However, it is a country where US strategic investment can reshape political incentives and create a new stakeholder class with vested interest in the US relationship. The Washington Accord is essentially a mechanism that transforms the DRC from a Chinese-dependent state into a quasi-French-shored supplier. By late 2024 and early 2025, the war in eastern DRC had created an opening. The chaos made Chinese investments precarious. If the US could broker peace and position itself as the guarantor of that peace, it could offer the DRC government something China could not: security and stability in exchange for privileged access to minerals. And the Washington Accord does not exist in isolation. It is part of a broader US strategy to build alternative logistics infrastructure for African minerals. The Lobito Corridor is the physical manifestation of this strategy. The Lobito Corridor is a rail and road infrastructure project that aims to connect the mineral-rich provinces of the DRC and Zambia to the Atlantic port of Lobito in Angola. The US, with support from the EU, UK, and Japan, is funding the reconstruction and modernization of this corridor. The geopolitical logic is elegant. Instead of DRC minerals flowing east to Dar es Salaam, where Chinese firms dominate port operations, or northwest to Chinese-controlled ports, they flow south through Angola to Lobito. From Lobito, minerals are shipped directly to the US and Europe, bypassing Chinese intermediaries and processing hubs. The Lobito corridor represents the physical embodiment of the friendshoring strategy. Minerals from Africa transported on Western-controlled infrastructure to Western ports, processed in Western facilities, and used in Western industries. For Rwanda and Kagame, this is a strategic win. Instead of Rwanda having to conduct cross-border raids unilaterally and then face criticism for violating Congo's sovereignty, Kinshasa has now agreed to do the job. But Rwanda gains more than security guarantees. Before the Washington Accord, Rwanda faced mounting international pressure and sanctions over its support for M23. For Kagame, these sanctions represented a dangerous trend. The Washington Accord allowed Kagame to pivot dramatically. By signing a US brokered peace deal, Rwanda transformed itself from the problem into part of the solution. But perhaps the most significant prize for Rwanda is the prospect of economic integration with Eastern DRC's lucrative economy through official channels rather than illicit smuggling. By cooperating with Kinshasa, Rwanda stands to gain formal access to Congolese markets and resources. So from Rwanda's perspective, the Washington Accord is a near-perfect outcome. It neutralizes sanctions threats, legitimizes its economic dominance of the Kivu region, and allows it to continue profiting from Congolese minerals while claiming to be a peacemaker. For President Felix Tshisekedi, the decision to sign this Washington Accord was a calculated gamble born of military desperation and political pressure. By mid-2025, President Tshisekedi faced a genuine military crisis. M23 had achieved unprecedented territorial gains. In January 2025, M23 launched a coordinated offensive that caught the FARDC unprepared. By February 2025, M23 had briefly captured Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu province. The strategic implications were dire. M23's control of North and South Kivu effectively strangled the region. Supply lines to Goma were cut. The humanitarian situation deteriorated rapidly. The fundamental problem was that the Congolese army was vastly outmatched. M23 was equipped with modern Rwandan weaponry, including night vision goggles, surface-to-air missiles, and vehicle-mounted rocket launchers. The idea that the DRC could militarily defeat M23 without external support was increasingly becoming imaginary. By attempting to form a government of national unity, Tshisekedi was trying to spread responsibility for the deal across multiple political parties. For Tshisekedi, personally, the deal is a high-stakes gamble. Success brings redemption, failure brings historical condemnation. But who are the winners of this deal? The Washington Accord was barely signed before the machinery of capitalist opportunity was set in motion. Major corporations and investors have already announced initiatives, secured permits, signed commercial agreements, and began deploying capital into the DRC and Rwanda. The most prominent corporate beneficiary is Cobalt Metals, an artificial intelligence-driven mining exploration company backed by billionaires Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. In July 2025, just weeks after the Washington Accord was finalized, Cobalt announced a $1 billion commercial framework agreement to develop the Manono lithium deposits in Tanganyika province. Manono, you see, is one of the world's largest underdeveloped lithium resources, estimated to contain over 16 million tons of lithium oxide equivalent. In August 2025, Cobalt secured 7 exploration permits in the DRC. These permits grant Cobalt the right to explore for lithium, coltan, rare earth elements, tin, and gold. Beyond individual companies though, massive investment funds are positioned to benefit from the deal. BlackRock and Vanguard, the two largest asset management firms in the world, hold significant stake in multiple mining companies active in the DRC and Rwanda. Now, while BlackRock and Vanguard do not directly own mining companies, they manage trillions of dollars in client capital, and that capital is increasingly being directed toward critical minerals investment. A less visible but strategically important dimension of the deal is the interest from US defense contractors. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Technologies, and Northrop Grumman all depend on critical minerals for defense systems. From the US perspective, this returns the US to a position of influence in African mining, and it generates returns for US investors. But does this deal actually end the war? The Washington Accord was ceremonially signed on December 4, 2025. Within 24 hours, artillery fire erupted in the hills of South Kivu. Congolese government forces and M23 rebels clashed near villages that had been contested for months. The war had not ended. It had merely been rebranded diplomatically. The most critical flaw in the Washington Accord is that the M23 rebel group was not even a direct signatory to the main political agreement. Instead, M23 is negotiating through a separate track mediated by Qatar in Doha. This creates a situation where the agreement can't succeed diplomatically while the war continues on the ground. Now, parallel to the M23 problem is the FDLR neutralization challenge. The Washington Accord commits the DRC to neutralizing the FDLR, with Rwandan's troop withdrawal conditioned on DRC success. However, the practical reality is that neutralizing the FDLR is far more difficult than the agreement's vague language suggests. The FDLR is not a discrete military organization that can be easily targeted and defeated. The group is deeply embedded in the Congolese social and economic fabric. FDLR fighters have lived in Eastern Congo for 30 plus years. Many have married into local communities, own land, operate businesses, and have integrated into the civilian population. Complicating matters further is the documented fact that elements of the Congolese armed forces collaborate with the FDLR. Rwanda has made clear that it will not withdraw before FDLR neutralization is complete. Now, given the DRC's military poor track record at military operations and its alleged collaboration with the FDLR, this conditionality could justify indefinite Rwandan military presence in the DRC. While diplomats toasted in Washington, the humanitarian situation in Eastern DRC remained catastrophic. As of late 2025, the DRC hosted 7.3 million internally displaced persons, the highest number in Africa. In North Kivu alone, over millions of people have been displaced by the M23 conflict since 2022. Cholera is endemic due to lack of sanitation. Women who venture out to collect firewood are routinely raped by armed men from all sides of the conflict. The Washington Accord promises the safe return of displaced populations. However, for refugees in these camps, this promise rings hollow. Their villages are occupied by M23 or other armed groups. Their homes have been destroyed. The Washington Accord of 2025 is a masterclass in transactional diplomacy. It solves a specific problem for the United States, which is access to strategic minerals against Chinese dominance. It offers Rwanda economic legitimacy and security. It gives the Congolese government a financial lifeline. But for the people of Eastern Congo, it offers little. It does not disarm the militias that terrorize their villages. It does not bring justice for the atrocities they have suffered. It does not guarantee a fair share of the wealth beneath their feet. Instead, it commercializes the status quo. It creates a framework where the flow of minerals can coexist with low-level conflict. The war may technically end in terms of large-scale state-on-state battles, but the violence of extraction, displacement, and exploitation will continue. And that is a problem with the DRC's deal. For a better understanding of African geopolitics, follow along for more.